lot like your science one that you did from your previous semester. So the beginning is simple, lesson title. Please list any sources. We know there's great sources out there. So if you consult me or a cooperating teacher that you're working with, Pinterest, give credit when due. So in part one, you stated your goal. So what is your goal for the lesson? What general topics do you want to cover? Then we're going to focus on the objectives, and that's when we get specific. I believe all of you learned how to write objectives when you were in 314 when you talked about lesson planning and assessment. So when you write your objective, you're thinking, what specific measurable outcome do you expect the students? So they should be starting with, the students will be able to, followed by our observable verbs. In the resource section, I am going to put up these observable verbs to help you. And I always find this really useful. I use it a lot. So that will be in the resource section of ReggieNet. So once you state your lesson objectives, also when writing objectives, you need to think about, especially because we're doing math, are your students using any manipulatives? If they are, you want to put that in the objective. Students using manipulatives, students will be able to, and then you can list it. So think about that when you're writing objectives. Are there any manipulatives that students are using? And is that part of their goal? Are they able to use those? And list that in the objective. Okay, simple and straightforward. The standards, and now your purpose for rationale. So why is this lesson going to be meaningful for this group of students? What have you observed, or have you done a pre-assessment to lead you to this point? So how does it fit, this specific lesson fit into the larger learning taking place? So remember, what prior knowledge are students going to need to activate for this? And then the assessment outcome level, that's when you can reference that chart again and decide what level of Bloom's instructional outcome that's there. So now we're going to have to think of your informal, your formative assessment, and then your formal assessment. So here it gives specific what methods you're going to be using. We just did an asynchronous assignment. Go back and pull up that PowerPoint that I made. How are you going to get that informal? How are you going to get that formative assessment? And then when you're doing your lesson, you're going to put an asterisk next to where the formative assessment will take place. Now, your formal assessment, this is what some people have a little bit of trouble with. So this is the specific strategy occurring at the end of a lesson. It could be at a later date, and you just need to put that in the lesson plan, but tell me what you're going to do. Are students going to have a quiz? Are students going to do one-on-one interviews with you? Tell me how you're going to collect that summative assessment. And again, it can be at a later date. Just make sure you put that in there. So now we need to give our knowledge of the students, basic demographics about your students. Now, unfortunately, we have a situation where some of you don't have students right now. So I would like you to just kind of, here you can just kind of list, this can be, for those of you that don't have students, this just can be what you're kind of looking for. This part I'm not going to give a specific grade, but I want you to practice answering these questions in your mind as you're thinking about the lesson plan. So this can be very general if you do not have students, and you can just think, what do I need to know about my students and how can I access that information? Also, if you want, for reference, you could use a former where your clinical placement was last semester. So to practice reflecting on that information, activating the Illinois Interactive Report Card to get demographics about your building, anything like that. This part is going to be, again, really informal because we do not have students this semester. Now we need to think of our native speakers. So what academic terms? So what terms, what mathematical terms will you introduce or review with students listed here? And in here, we need to think about our ELL students. What should you include here does not include supportive strategies for ELLs. That's going to be located in the differentiation, which is right here, right below it. I didn't need to scroll down. So here include those academic language demands that ELLs will need support with in this lesson. So don't tell me how you're going to support, but what academic terms are you going to need to reintroduce to your English language learner or introduce to your English language learners. Okay, now we have our differentiation. So what elements of this plan will be differentiated so that all learners can master the objectives? So what strategies will you use to differentiate? Will this require different assessment procedures? How will you challenge those who are already thinking of reaching the material? Sometimes we forget about those who are exceeding, and how will you challenge them? Now, going down to accommodations and modifications. Do instruction and assessments require accommodations, modifications for specific students' needs? So think about those students in your classroom with IEPs, 504 supports. And again, here you're going to have to kind of think outside of the box if you do not have students right now, or reference students that you've had from your clinical placement. I also believe those websites that I had in our last week asynchronous work would be great to think of some accommodations and modifications. So reference that. Okay, again, resources for the lessons. That what will the students be using? Do you need a flip chart, dice, base 10 materials, whiteboards, subitizing cards, anything that the students or yourself will be using? And then how long do you anticipate this lesson will take? Now, all that is, we're going to finally lead us to the instructional plan. So this is the step-by-step procedure for your lesson, and be sure to clearly, not quickly, clearly describe all procedures, directions, and instructions. So what's the hook? How are you going to get the students' attention? And that's not just today, guys, we're going to practice adding two numbers. No, give a real life example. Boys and girls, yesterday, I was setting the dinner table and I needed to find something to get them, a real life example to get them excited. Think of yourself. Or I was shopping yesterday. Who likes video games? Something that can get them excited and kind of tie it in to the skill that you're going to be teaching. And remember, the before, you want to access the prior knowledge, pose your I can statement. So think up to that objectives, but turn it into student language, I can. And then smoothly transition to the during. The during is where the students are going to engage in that mathematical activity. They can either be in partners, small groups, or one-on-one. But you want to make sure that this during time is when you are going to walk around and formally assess them. Formative assessment. So are you going to be taking notes? And that would be listed up here. So how are you going to do that informal or formative assessment in the during? Now, when you're doing that, you're going to ask students to examine their own thinking, allow students, how are you going to initiate them to ask questions with one another? So what are you going to be doing to get them engaged? Now, the after phase of the lesson is where we want children to work with a community of learners. And this is not time to line up for PE. We want to bring them together and we want to have our students summarize our learning and what did they get out of it? How could we use this in the future? We want to really listen actively to one another. This should be a time of excitement, but kind of close it in. This is when we need to say, okay, students, do you remember what was our I can statement? And let's do a quick self-assessment. How do you think you did? And that can be your summative if you choose, or at a later time if you're going to do more of a formal summative. Now, the next steps would be, it doesn't have to be in this lesson, but how will you offer, if they were working in groups, for example, how will you offer some independent practice? Are they doing a homework assignment? Tomorrow, are you going to lead into some more independent practice? And then finally, transitions, again, where we're going to have to think outside the box if we're not in a classroom. How are they going to line up? Are you going to call them maybe they were learning about even numbers. Are you gonna say even numbers, some kind of activity to get them to line up? So anyway, the transition is how you're gonna get them to move on to the next activity. And again, for those of you not in the classroom, this can be made up. So what potential problems might arise? I always think your number one problem with our little kiddos are early finishers, or those that need super supportive help and might be constantly interrupting if you're having them do more of a workshop model. So think about those, and it's okay to just kind of write down any potential problems that you think might happen, because they're going to happen. And then finally, what kind of family involvement, and that might be in the next steps, but you can kind of, it's okay to rewrite it there in the family involvement. So could you put this in your newsletter? Could you have kids do a family game? So just kind of think about family involvement here. So that's the template that I went over. And then finally, so when you turn in the rough draft, you are just, sorry, I'm gonna stop here. When you turn in your rough draft, you're just gonna turn that in, just that template, to me in a Word document, and then I'm going to go through and list my comments there and send it back to you. You will have plenty of time to revise it before the final draft. We also can meet via Zoom if you prefer that, or if you are struggling with some ideas, just shoot me an email and we can set up a Zoom meeting to go over part of the lesson plan. Now, the next part I wanted to show you is the checklist that goes for part 3. So this is your final draft's done. You've made the revisions. Now you're ready to turn in your final copy with me. And that's when you will do a checklist here. And the checklist, again, reminds me of your science. So this will be a little bit different this semester because you are not doing the lesson. So these two NA, because you are not having it observed. But basically, I want you to think, and again, this is a way to self-assess yourself. We've been talking about that, and go through it. And you are the TC, you're the teacher candidate. So here is where you will check your boxes. So you will go through and answer these questions. And then on the right side is where I will make my comments. Again, because I'm so involved in the rough draft process, in the past, students have done so well on this assignment because we've worked as a team to revise the lesson, and where there was a little bit of weakness, we kind of beefed it up and made it really strong. So these should be kind of quick, check the box. Yeah, so again, I didn't want to waste time in our synchronous section, so I thought whenever you're ready, you can pop open this video and watch it at any time. So good luck with your lesson plans. And again, as always, stay safe and